I had this friend who was really into the occult. Unfortunately, I was the one who got him tuned into it. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal and all things weird, so I thought the subject would interest him. He started going deep into the subject, to the point where we wouldn't talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt the conversation and force the subject back to occult matters. Rude, but sometimes people go through phases where their interest is all they want to talk about. It was a mostly forgivable offence. I think I should mention that this particular friend didn't have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside a lot. He didn't have the best looking relationships with women. His world was kind of small, and I did enjoy hanging out with him, so I did my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to just brush him off, because he was acting a little weirder than normal. Honestly, for the longest time, he was a totally normal guy. We'd chat and play games together on the PlayStation. Sometimes we'd go see movies with my boyfriend accompanying us. We all hung out at the park, we went swimming. Overall, we had a good time hanging out. Things started to go downhill when he started to smoke DMT. Personally, I think psychedelics are amazing tools that can offer insights into your life, but they should be treated with respect. My friend got to the point where he was making it himself, apparently an easy thing to do after a meager amount of research, and he was smoking it daily, multiple times a day. For those of you who aren't familiar with the substance, when you smoke it, you get transported to a different world, an entirely new plane of existence. Your body and yourself doesn't exist anymore. You're just exploring this alternate reality dreamscape. My personal experience with it led me to seeing a dragon once in this kaleidoscope of cornucopia. People see all kinds of different things there. Imagine what that does to a person when they're smoking it 30 plus times a day. He started telling me things like he was the reincarnated Osiris. He said he was seeing Egyptian hieroglyphics all over the place in waking life. Apparently, he had hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom, even when he wasn't smoking DMT. Of course, I was very alarmed to hear all of this, and I told him he needed to take a serious break. No drugs at all for a few months, so we can find some solid footing in reality again. At this point, I was still hanging out with him because he obviously needed some help. And like I said before, he didn't have a lot of friends that could give him that. He was also the black sheep of the family, so I knew he wasn't getting any kind of support from them. He was really close to his sister, and I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk him into getting some psychiatric help because he was slipping past the point of no return. I'm not really sure if she took my messages seriously, since we didn't really know each other. Plus, she is at least 6 years younger than us, and possibly didn't grasp how serious the situation was becoming. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part where things start to get really creepy. My boyfriend had made arrangements to hang out with our friend at the park. I didn't really want to go because I felt like I needed a break from him and this nonsensical ranting. I just couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend said he wasn't all that bad, so we went anyway. We got to the park and he's his usual self, ranting about Egypt and made up gods that only he knew the truth about, etc. He also had this large hunting knife that he kept fiddling with the whole time we were on the walk. He told us that he'd been using it in ceremonial magic and that it helped to anguish negative thoughts. It made me extremely uneasy. He would do this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions near his heart or head, like he was mock stabbing himself, all while holding a conversation with me and my boyfriend. I think we were both really on edge and didn't know what to say or do about it. I tried to distract him from doing it by bringing up other subjects that might interest him, but he kept on with his ritual. Keep in mind, we were walking on a trail, so it wasn't like we could just say goodbye then and there. We had to walk back to our car and drop him off at his car. My boyfriend had the bright idea that we should get some lunch after our walk, even though I was doing my best to give him a look that said, "No, you crazy fuck. Why do you think I want to spend any more time with this nut?" But it must not have been very effective, or my boyfriend was just ignoring it. I'm not sure. Either way, we ended up getting in the car to go get lunch. In the car, I was driving. My boyfriend was in the passenger seat, and our weirdo friend was in the back. As we're heading through a busy part of town where all the shopping and restaurants are, I hear the distinctive sound of a belt buckle being undone. Then I heard the worst sound imaginable. I peek back out the corner of my eye and my suspicions were confirmed. This crazy fucker was full on jacking off in our back seats. I mean, pants all the way down, bare arse on the seats, beating it so hard, it was like he wanted to rip it off. Instantly, I felt sick to my stomach, and all the nervous energy I had throughout the day pops up into my head. I was trying not to shake and trying to ignore it and drive through heavy traffic. I kind of had a freeze response, I guess. The whole time, I kept thinking about that huge ass knife he had in his pocket, and obviously he was completely off his rocket now. I was afraid to say anything or confront him because I didn't know how he was going to react. This part is nuts, but my boyfriend didn't fucking seem to notice, and the whole time he kept on rambling on about God knows what. I couldn't listen because my thoughts were 100% focused on driving and trying to act like I didn't know what was going on in my back seat. We get to the restaurant and my boyfriend runs inside to grab food. I'm left alone in the car with our friend, and I try to act like I'm browsing on my phone, when really I'm watching and listening as hard as I can. We don't talk. My boyfriend gets back and I complain that I'm tired, it's been a long day, let's drop him off, etc. So I drive us back to our friend's car, and he doesn't get out of the vehicle. He just sits there. I have to get a little bit rude and ask him to please get out and go home. He gets out of our car and walks over to his passenger side. I start getting really scared, and I suspected the worst. He pulled out a gun of some kind of bag he had on the seat, and he just walks over to our car with it. I don't know why the fuck I did this, but I was so pissed, I just got out of my car and walked right up to him. I was maybe 3 feet away and could see it was a loaded 9mm. I kept asking him over and over, "What are you doing?" Because apparently that's all my brain could think to do. I told him to get in his car and go home. He never said anything during this whole time, just kind of cried and had this wild look in his eye. For whatever reason, he got back into his car and drove off. I told my boyfriend obviously we are never hanging out with him again, and I didn't even want him to talk to him anymore. No contact, nada. A few months passed, and he occasionally messaged me through the PlayStation or text on my phone. He said a lot of random stuff, and I just ignored it. Turns out, he moved down to Tennessee near Nashville. I don't know why. He had a roommate, and I think their girlfriend lived there. I'm not really sure about the situation. I think maybe he's turning his life around and getting a fresh start down there. I think it's best to cut all contact and let him regroup. I'm not interested in any kind of friendship with him, and I know he needed help beyond what I could offer. Again, I reached out to his sister and let her know that he had a gun. She managed to get it from him somehow, but it did little good in the end. I get a call around 11 p.m. one night that wakes me up. It's a man claiming he's a detective down in Gallatin, Tennessee, and my heart skips a beat. I start sweating and immediately ask what happened. Apparently, my former friend stabbed someone to death on Halloween. I don't know all the details, and the articles about it are kind of sparse. The whole thing is really surreal, and I'm just left feeling like I'm lucky that I didn't get shot last summer. Bit of background. My partner's tiny, like 5'2" and very petite. No one ever believes her age. She still gets ID'd at nearly 30. So my partner went to Amsterdam with a group of female friends when she was about 20. They were there for a general girls' holiday, and they were going out every night drinking. One night they did a bar crawl, and there was a professional photographer taking photos all night of the partygoers. In one pub, however, this changed, and there were now 2 photographers. This pub was off the main strip, and wasn't tourist town, more of a local bar. Anyway, this second photographer was taking photos on his mobile phone, and was saying, "I take pictures too, I take pictures too." My partner challenged him and said, "I don't think you're one of the photographers. Let me check your phone then." And this guy ran away, being challenged. My partner then checked with the people running the bar crawl and about what just happened, because it made her feel uneasy. They explained what happened, and the workers started treating it seriously straight away. My partner and her friends went outside at some point with bar crawl staff member to talk where they couldn't really hear each other, as inside was pretty loud. And when outside, they saw this man showing the pictures on his phone to a Land Rover Discovery, which had fully blacked out tinted windows. Luckily, the bar crawl workers also witnessed this, and they escalated it to another level. My partner and a group of friends were escorted to a safe place, and it was explained that kidnapping and human trafficking unfortunately does happen in this part of Europe, and that it is more than likely what was being planned to happen to my partner and a friend who had been photographed, as they were clearly tourists and looked so young at the time. Police were made aware and statements were taken by the staff of the bar crawl, as well as my partner, but obviously she never heard the outcome, as they came back home a few days later. My brother's first house now exists in my memory, like a tall rectangular skeleton built from popsicle sticks. Tall, very old, and creaky. Floors made of old wood, erected next to 100 others that came from the 1920s. Tyler Durden's dilapidated house on Paper Street, only livable and not leaking rusty piss from every ceiling. A starter home with a million problems, and only one that could ever be fixed. Mrs. Draven. I can't recall ever hearing that last name since. Very odd, and I can't imagine the heritage. She died on her living room sofa, and she was the last tenant to live there before him. She lived there for so many decades that I could feel myself inhaling her cigarette-laden skin shavings that had become laminated in the walls. Neighbours say she was a nasty old bat. She apparently died 2 weeks before they recovered the body, because all of her payments were late. So the inevitable conversation that took place between my brother and I on Halloween night of 1994 was, what if Mrs. Draven is still there? I was 11, and he was about 25. Trick-or-treating came and went, and is only a blur in the back closet of my mind now. The entire plot of this story occurred inside of about a 45-minute space of time, inside of a dark, ghost-quiet house around 1 a.m, or somewhere around that time. Mrs. Draven's name was uttered from my lips dozens of times. It came with an air of caution from his. My brother was a tough blue-collar guy. Nothing rattles him. But there was always a look of trepidation in his eyes, amidst the nervous smirks in his expression when I'd bring her up. The night was over. His puppy Charlotte was locked in a cage downstairs, and we both laid next to each other in his bed, on the second floor, all of which was just one big room. 5 feet from the foot of the bed was a long, tight wooden staircase. I always hated the wall concealing it. The thought of not being able to see someone until they reached the very top made me shudder. The streets were asleep. Just as we were about to drift off, Scott actually brought it up. It's Halloween. What if Mrs. Draven comes tonight? And then it happened, nearly simultaneously as the name drew from his mouth. I felt so bad for Charlotte and what she might be seeing down there. There was a violent thud throughout the entire house, like it was picked up and dropped by a giant, and the clanging of what literally sounded like every pot and pan in his kitchen had been levitating in the dark and all dropped at once. A cacophony of smashing, clamouring metal. I can't even remember my reaction, but I remember there was a horrified grasp from him. Holy shit! That's all I remember that came from his mouth. But when all of his muscles tensed against my back, I knew for the first time in my life he was actually truly scared. Each time I tried to whisper something, he'd halt it with shh, followed by unbearable silence. That was it. A crash and a slam coming directly from the kitchen at the exact moment he said her name. I can't shake the feeling that she might have heard us from that far away, talking about her. The house rang silent after a long time. Maybe 30 minutes. We both just laid there in shock under the covers. Intruder flashed in my mind for a brief second, but no one human being could have possibly produced 5 dozen different noises at once. I could only try to ignore it. Charlotte wasn't barking, not even whining. I so badly wanted to check on her, but I wasn't going down there. I suppose it's time to end the story. As I began to finally drift off, I heard something else. The one sound I prayed not to hear. the steps creaking with the agonizing ascension of very careful footsteps. One after another, but very faint. I wish they'd just sprinted to the top and gotten it over with. Eventually, the steps drew closer and closer. Then, a pause for maybe a minute, like someone was listening in on us. Then, the final two, and they stopped. I didn't say anything to Scott, and whether or not he was asleep in that moment, I'll never know. He claims not to have heard it, but I admit suspicion. I never looked to see what was standing at the foot of the bed. It was a warm night, but the sudden chill in the air and full body goosebumps awash all of my body fell down on us like a ghost of winter wind. I can't remember when I finally fell asleep, but I did. I awoke the next morning to find my brother out of bed, as the scent of sizzling bacon in the air. I emerged at the bottom of the stairs to find him making breakfast. He didn't say anything, maybe a dejected hey, if that. So, what was it? He remained silent as he dumped pancakes on my plate, and finally answered with a response that still shakes me when I think about it all these years later. Nothing. So what fell? Nothing. Everything was in its place. Of course, I'd later talk to him about Mrs. Draven and ask him over and over if anything else had ever happened there. He said it didn't, followed by, because I've never said her name again. Thanks to the internet, I've been able to search her name in her town, and it's actually produced a result. One result. Esmeralda Draven. If the name Esmeralda isn't creepy enough, the photo definitely is. Her husband was a sheriff, and in grainy black and white, there is one photo of the couple online, photocopied from an old newspaper article after she died. The picture is from 1983, the year I was born. Edgar and Esmeralda Waters, a pudgy smiling man in a police uniform and cap, and next to him, a woman considerably taller, a contemptible scowl smeared across her face, sunken cheeks, bony fingers, and a long black ponytail hanging far below her waist. Clad in a very old-fashioned, long-back dress. Esmeralda Draven. I thank God that wasn't the image in my mind that night, or I might be seeing a therapist. I was getting fed up with my neighbour. I'd only seen her once. Her relentlessly loud radio had my floor vibrating. I'd bang feverishly on the wall, and in response, she'd only turn it up louder. She listens to some evangelical AM Christian channel. I'm now an agnostic, who could recite scripture more accurately than a devout Baptist. One night, I had to get to bed early for a 6:30 AM Zoom meeting, and I'd had enough. I'd stomped out of my apartment and angrily rapped my fist on a door. The radio went up another few notches, before I began literally kicking her fucking door down. In this moment, the girl living across the hall from me opened her door in her pajamas, wiping her eyes ahead of a dark living room. Obviously awakened from her slumber, brows furrowed with disdain. God, she began. I thought maybe she was angry with me, but then she continued with, "It never ends with her." Just as I was about to respond, I heard the clicking of the doorknob behind me. The girl across the hall's look of horror said all I needed to know. When I turned to look at the woman, I was in shock. She must have been in her mid to late 50s. The first thing that pummeled my senses was the foul smell that instantly punched me in the face. Before I had even a moment to compute what that repugnant odour might be, her appearance alone forced every hair on my body to stand at attention. Her hair was ratty and matted, sticking up and out on all sides like she'd intentionally stuck her fingers in a light socket. The tips were blood red, receding down to grey roots, looking like she hadn't dyed it in months. Her face was pale and weathered, leathery as some albino reptile, cracks and lines all over like some map of the Mojave Desert. Nose like a bird beak, cheeks contoured and eyes with big black irises sunken into cavernous sockets in her head. She looked emaciated. What was most disquieting was that her stain-covered light blue robe was partially opened to a point of exposing her saggy left breast, dangling like a missile wrapped in a sack made of flesh. In her skeletal, bony fingers was a long cigarette, 3/4 of the way smoked, but the ashes not yet flicked. She took a puff and blew it in my face, tapping the cigarette ashes to her floor without care. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. My veins were pulsating with dread when I got a look at her walls, all etched with a sharp object and drawn with in red and black mark crosses, both upright and upside down. Standing atop her muted TV, emitting a picture of nothing but deep blue static waves, was a giant wooden crucifix with Christ nailed to it, and scattered along her floor was garbage, from Chinese food containers to ripped open packets of baby wipes. Not a word was ever spoken. The look in her eyes said pure religious indoctrination and evil. A Christian nut with no regard for the people, her apartment, or her hygiene. I know this not just because of the hellscape that was her room, or the sense of what later I could only identify as roadkill emanating from some dark corner, but because of her teeth. She flashed me a mouthful of essentially broken, missing, and rotting elongated corn kernels before slamming the door in my face. I put in earplugs, but they were of almost no help. I popped some Benadryl, and despite the religious gibberish seeping through the walls, I was able to daze off in a state of extreme fatigue for just a little while. I awoke sometime later in the middle of the night to just silence. For the first time in my 3 weeks of living there, she turned off the radio. Calmness was actually eerie, but I was about to be faced with something I'd not ever seen, even in my worst nightmares. I awoke on top of my covers, shoes still on, facing my bedroom door, which was wide open. I never leave it open. Ever since I was a child, I've been terrified of dark hallways, and this night was only a justification of my phobia. Amidst the warm glow of my hallway nightlight, I found myself in what I thought at first was only a bad dream, until my hoodie zipper stung me as it pricked out one of my arm hairs. I wasn't dreaming. In my doorway was the dark silhouette of a figure staring down at me. The wild, matted outline of hair told me that it was one of two things: an evil clown or my psychotic neighbour. The wafting scent of cigarettes ash confirmed the latter. I was frozen, unable to speak or move. Her eyes were wide and bulging from their sockets. From the little that I could make out, I could see the expression of fury in her gaze. "You really should leave your door locked," she muttered in a deep, scratchy voice, a voice irreparably marred from decades of inhaling carcinogens, and it was utterly unnerving. I could see that she was grasping something in her hand, but she turned and walked out before I got a chance to make it out. I was petrified, frozen, and unable to draw a single breath. I didn't sleep that well that night. Not at all, in fact. The very next day, I spoke to the landlord. The words barely escaped my lips before his face degraded from passivity to rage, and he spat angrily the words, "That's it. I've had enough of that old bitch. His sister promised she'd keep her in check." I asked what he meant when he said sister, but he thrust his shovel over his shoulder and huffed off in his haunches to the management office. I hadn't even had a chance to tell him about the smell. Only one more day had passed before the odour got so bad I could hear people opening their doors one by one and loudly discussing it. I could sense unease in one older lady's voice. I was on my way out the door to go to my girlfriend's house. On the way out, I saw the girl from across the hall talking to the others. I don't know what the smell is, but I saw her dragging something to the dumpster. Of course, I was thinking what all of you are right now. It's a dead sister. But no, she said it was a small bag, the size of maybe a cat or miniature dog. I left for the night and got home maybe around 3 p.m. the next day. Police were all over the parking lot and, as you can imagine, littered through my hallway. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is a crime scene. If you need to grab some of your things, that's fine. For the next few hours, we need you to find somewhere else to go." I came home later that night to find her room covered in police tape and a small gathering of residents congregating in the hallway. I immediately joined them, and what I found out was utterly nightmarish. The police were called on, after she dragged another stinking garbage bag to the dumpster. So a neighbour named Joy's husband, William, went out there with gloves and ripped into it. In the bag, he discovered a hand. He didn't look further. It turns out the woman, named Lois, was a violent schizophrenic. She had lived with her sister. She died one night, apparently in her sleep. Lois, speaking fast like a meth fiend, was heard explaining to police that she didn't have anywhere to bury her, so she cut her to pieces with a variety of knives and a box cutter after having a vigil in the grace of God for her sister in her living room. She said she hadn't let anyone know because she didn't want her sister to leave. I still don't know why she was placed in handcuffs, but I presume it's because of her mental illness, and she was being transported to a mental hospital. Though, I wonder if it was for something else. Maybe her sister hadn't just died in her sleep. Why do I think this? Because another neighbour, a guy about my age in his mid-20s, named Cameron, told me a blood-chilling story. He said that one night, a few weeks ago, he was watching TV with his fiancée, when all of a sudden he heard a noise. The floor of his living room creaking behind him. He turned around to find Lois standing in the doorway, brandishing an opened box cutter. And what she said, I'll never forget. You shouldn't leave your door unlocked. You never know who might live next to you. Before turning and walking out. Now I know what she had in her hand, the night she visited me. He called police, and they said they just couldn't knock on her door and arrest her, but if she ever leaves her apartment, they could. I'm not sure how much they needed to clean in her apartment, but it was 2 months before I got another neighbour, an elderly couple. Now it's quieter, and my door is always locked, but still, in my nightmares, it never is. Now that my friends and I were teenagers, our parents were okay with us being out a little past dark. Up the road, behind our neighbourhood, was a church. Beyond that was an old abandoned apartment building. Attached to the church was a basketball court. So often when we go and play, we would mischievously throw rocks and bricks through the windows of the apartment building, and then, of course, run. There's no better feeling as a teen than that of getting away with something. We never went around that building at night, except once, and after that, we never went near it again. It was dark, dilapidated, and utterly spooky. One night, my friend John and I were bored, so we brought up the idea of exploring the inside of the building. Dude, it's freaking dark in there, I said. Yeah, which means there's nobody around, and we can do whatever we want. His plan did make sense, so we went, packing a flashlight each. Upon arrival, we searched for an entrance. We had to go around to the side opposite that of the church, across from someone's backyard in a neighbouring street, which is precisely why we never went on that side before. As we turned the corner, we were greeted with a glass-paned door up 3 steps. Let's bust out the door, John said excitedly. Then we heard a noise. We looked in the direction of the door and saw a light was turned on inside. John took off running, but I was frozen with fear. Inside the door was the dark silhouette of what looked like a very tall man in a hat. One of those professional hats, kind of like the type which airplane pilots would wear. We started to back away. John screamed in the distance, "Dude, what the hell are you doing? Let's go!" The man just stood there, staring at me from inside of the building, not moving a muscle. The man then very slowly opened the door and walked out. I backed away, and then shone my light on him. He put his hands over his eyes to shield him from the light. He was wearing a bellhop uniform and hat, black sacks, and black dress shoes. His skin was pale white. He flashed me a giant, unsettling grin, and asked me a question. "Are you here to visit Miss Rose?" I dropped the light down to his feet, his big, browless, wild eyes glistening in the moonlight like a clothed skeleton, his skin so white it was almost translucent. "She's been expecting you. Come on in." He gestured for me to come inside, before slowly taking a step towards me. I have to go. Oh, I wouldn't do that, he continued. Miss Rose has been waiting for you for a long time. In fact, she's the only tenant I have. I, I'm just a kid, I explained. John was long gone now. The man stepped a little closer. I know it was you who vandalized my building. Those windows cost $500 each. And now that I can clearly describe you to police, it's in your best interest to come inside. If you do, I will let this go. Being only 13 and terrified of being in trouble, I completely abandoned the notion of not talking to strangers and walked inside. As I passed the doorman, he placed his hand on the small of my back and whispered, "Good." He smelled of BO and something else I couldn't put my finger on at the time. As I entered, I was greeted by a hallway with huge holes in the plaster, ripped up and stained carpeting, cobwebs, the smell of mildew, and, at the end of the hall, a staircase going to the second floor. Miss Rose lives in 2B. Kindly proceed upstairs. I don't want to. I really need to leave. The precariousness of the situation finally hit me before the lights went out, and I was standing in pitch darkness. I turned and couldn't see out the door window because the man was in between me and it. Terrifyingly, I then heard the unzipping of pants and the clanging of a belt as they dropped. His breathing began to deepen, which I can now only describe as excited sexual arousal. "We can't do this here," he whispered. I turned on my flashlight, which he instantly snatched from my hand. His pants and underwear were off, and he was exposed. "Keep moving up the stairs," he said, clenching his belt on the other hand, looped as if he was planning on using it to strike me. And then, "Jacob?" A shrill, old female voice sounded out from the top of the stairs. "Jacob, did you catch one for me?" "Yes, Miss Rose, he's on his way up," he replied, before giving me a terrifying gaze with those bulging, psychotic eyes. "Don't make me beat you unconscious." Henry Purcell's depressing piece, Dido's Lament, literally started to play upstairs. A fucking piano. I backed up and turned towards the stairs, knowing what I was going to be forced to do. But then, from outside, a flashing of red and blue. I reacted. I ran towards the man and shoved him. He caught me with a lash to the back from the belt, which was excruciating, but I made it outside, screaming. Police searched the premises and arrested the man, a woman, and also found a child who went missing weeks ago. Damaged goods, unfortunately. John called police immediately when he got home and told them where to go. It turns out the man, a crack addict named Jacob, and his mother Rose were involved in an incestuous relationship, and also both previously convicted sex offenders. I never found out what kind of sex offences, but I had a good idea. As a creepy, unsettling matter of fact, Jacob was molested by his mother and her boyfriend for most of his childhood, prompting CYS to remove him from the home at 12, at the urging of one of his teachers. It wasn't until more than a decade later they reunited and began to engage in and rekindle a sexual relationship. Thank you, John, for saving my life. I should have listened. However, I'm glad this happened. Who knows what worse things could have been done to Timothy Dalton had we not showed up that day. I can't fathom what would have went through the mind of a 7-year-old during that time, and I don't want to know. The building has since been demolished. Jacob and Rose Cremley both remain in prison to this day, and still, Jacob proclaimed his love for her. It's a sick world.